In the autumn of 1845, an entire country watched its only food turn to black rot in the ground. Within a few years, 1 million people would be dead. Another 2 million would flee across the ocean, never to return. A nation would lose a quarter of its people, and it would never, to this day, fully recover. But here is the part they rarely tell you. Those people did not die because the potato failed. They died because of a decision, made by men in warm offices hundreds of miles away, who watched a nation starve and called it the will of God. This is the story of the potato, the humble root that fed the poor, built the modern world, and then, through a fungus and a colder kind of cruelty, became the deadliest crop in European history. But to understand how a single vegetable could kill 1 million people, we have to go back to a mountain and to a plant that almost no one in the world was willing to eat. The potato was not born in Ireland. It was born on the roof of the world. High in the Andes Mountains of South America, in what is now Peru and Bolivia, farmers domesticated the wild potato thousands of years ago. Some say as far back as 10,000. Up there, where wheat and corn could not survive the thin air and the frost, the potato thrived. It grew underground, protected from the cold. It gave more food from a small patch of land than almost anything else on Earth. And there was not just one potato. The Andean peoples grew thousands of varieties, purple ones, black ones, knotted ones no bigger than a marble. This was not a crop. It was a whole living library of them. When the Inca built their empire, the potato marched with their armies. They even learned to freeze-dry it in the mountain cold, stamping out the water with their feet, creating a light, storable food called chuño that could last for years. An empire in the clouds ran on the potato. Then, in the 16th century, the Spanish arrived, hunting for silver and gold. Almost as an afterthought, they carried the strange, lumpy root back across the Atlantic to Europe. And Europe recoiled. Because to European eyes, the potato was deeply wrong. It grew in the dirt, in the dark, like something hiding. It belonged to the nightshade family, cousin to plants that were genuinely poisonous. It was not mentioned anywhere in the Bible, which to a deeply religious continent felt like a warning. People blamed it for leprosy, for fevers, for sin itself. Some called it the devil's apple. For 200 years, most of Europe refused to eat it. The potato was fed to pigs. It was fed to prisoners. It was grown, grudgingly, only by the desperate and the poor. But there is one more detail here, and like the black seeds of another story, it seems small, and it is not. When Europeans finally took the potato, they did not take the thousands of Andean varieties. They took a tiny handful, a narrow genetic slice of that vast mountain library, cut off from the rest. Remember that. A continent was about to build its survival on a plant with almost no variation left inside it. The catastrophe was already planted. It would take 2 centuries to grow. What finally changed Europe's mind was not science. It was hunger and war. For centuries, European life had been ruled by famine. The staple was grain, wheat, rye, oats, and grain had a fatal weakness. It grew above the ground, in plain sight. When armies marched across a country, and they marched constantly, they trampled the fields, burned the harvest, or simply ate it. A single bad summer or a single passing war could starve a region to death. The potato had none of those weaknesses. It grew hidden beneath the soil, where fire and boots and foraging armies could not reach it. It gave 2, 3, even 4 times more calories per acre than wheat. It grew in poor, wet ground where grain would rot. A single family could feed itself for a year on a plot of land barely larger than a garden. Slowly, rulers began to notice. In Prussia, King Frederick the Great ordered his people to plant potatoes and met flat refusal. So, the story goes, he tried something cleverer than an order. He planted a royal field of potatoes and posted armed guards around it, as though it were a treasure. The peasants reasoned that anything guarded so carefully must be worth stealing. At night, they crept in and took the plants for their own gardens. Whether every detail of that legend is true is debated by historians, but to this day, people still lay potatoes on Frederick's grave. In France, a man named Antoine Augustin Parmentier, who had survived on potatoes as a prisoner of war, devoted his life to selling them to a suspicious nation. He threw lavish dinners of potato dishes for the rich and famous. He convinced the king and queen to wear potato blossoms. He used the same trick as Frederick, guarding a potato field by day and letting it be robbed by night. Desire, he understood, is built on what you are told you cannot have. It worked. Across the 1700s and 1800s, the potato spread through Europe, and where it spread, the population exploded. More food from less land meant more children survived. Historians now credit the humble potato with a huge share of Europe's population boom, the boom that filled the new factories and powered the Industrial Revolution itself. The despised root, the devil's apple, had quietly become the engine of the modern world. And nowhere did it take hold more completely, more totally, more dangerously than on one wet green island on the western edge of Europe, Ireland. To understand what happened in Ireland, you have to understand who owned it. By the early 1800s, Ireland was ruled by Britain, and most of its land was owned by a small class of landlords, many of them living comfortably in England, who had never set foot on the fields that made them rich. The Irish who actually worked the land were mostly tenants. They rented tiny plots, and to pay that rent, they had to grow crops for the landlord to sell. That left the family itself with almost nothing to live on. And here is where the potato became a trap disguised as a blessing. Because the potato produced so much food on so little land, a family could survive on a scrap of an acre, if and only if they ate almost nothing but potatoes. And so they did. By the 1840s, roughly 3 million of Ireland's 8 million people depended on the potato for the bulk of everything they ate. An adult laborer might eat as much as 5 kilograms of potatoes a day, the weight of a large bag of flour, and little else. The potato was breakfast, dinner, and supper. It was survival itself. But it was worse than dependence on one crop. It was dependence on one kind of that crop. Across much of Ireland, the poor grew a single high-yield variety called the lumper. Cheap, heavy, reliable, and, like nearly every potato Europe had ever planted, part of that same narrow genetic sliver carried out of the Andes centuries before. Field after field, county after county, the plants were near-perfect copies of one another, which meant that whatever could kill one of them could kill all of them. And now, the cruelest fact of all. Ireland in these years was not a barren country. It was covered in wheat, in oats, in barley, in herds of cattle and pigs. Ireland was exporting food, vast quantities of it, the entire time. But that food was not for the Irish. It belonged to the landlords, and it was sold abroad to pay the rent. A country overflowing with grain and meat, whose poorest people were allowed to eat only the one crop they grew for themselves. Think about that for a second. An entire nation standing on top of a mountain of food it was not permitted to touch, balanced on a single fragile root. The clock was already ticking. Ireland just could not hear it yet. In 1845, it arrived. A microscopic organism called Phytophthora infestans, potato blight, crossed the Atlantic, most likely carried in the holds of ships. It had probably reached mainland Europe first. Then the wind carried its spores over the sea to Ireland, and it found, waiting for it, 3 million acres of nearly identical plants with no defense against it whatsoever. The blight worked with horrifying speed. A field could be green and healthy in the evening, and a black, rotting ruin by the next morning. A sickening smell hung over the whole country. When people dug up the potatoes to save them, they found them turned to foul mush in their hands. The one thing 3 million people ate had rotted in the ground in a matter of weeks. And because every plant was a copy of the last, there was no pocket of resistance anywhere, no variety that survived. What killed one killed them all. Now, a failed harvest is a natural disaster. What turned it into one of the great catastrophes of the century was the response, and that was made by men. Ireland was governed from London, and when the crops failed, the British government had choices. It could have closed the ports and kept Irish food in Ireland. It could have mounted a vast, sustained relief effort. Instead, its response was shaped by a fashionable idea of the age, that markets must be left alone, that charity made the poor lazy, that government should not interfere. The man placed in charge of famine relief was a treasury official named Charles Edward Trevelyan. He believed deeply in these ideas. He worried more about the cost of relief than the cost in lives, and he wrote of the starving Irish words that still chill historians today, that the famine was a mechanism of providence, an effective way to reduce a surplus population. He called the real evil not the hunger, but the selfish, perverse, and turbulent character of the people dying of it. Relief, when it came, was often deliberately made as harsh as possible so that no one would prefer it to work. Starving men were set to breaking rocks on pointless roads to earn wages too small to feed their families. To qualify for aid, tenants were sometimes forced to give up their land first, meaning survival and eviction became the same act. And the entire time, food kept leaving the country. Grain and livestock continued to sail out of Irish ports, sold abroad while, on the shore, families ate grass and died in ditches. This is the part that should make you angry. Whether it should be called deliberate genocide or catastrophic ideological negligence is still argued by historians, and it is a real debate. But the result is beyond dispute. In one of the richest empires the world had ever seen, 1 million human beings were allowed to starve to death. If this story is hitting you as hard as it hits me, subscribe. Every single week we uncover the hidden history behind something ordinary in your kitchen and how it shaped the world you live in now. What comes next is the part that reached all the way to America. For millions of Irish, there was only one way to survive: leave. They fled in their millions, crammed into overcrowded, disease-ridden vessels bound for America, Canada, and Britain. So many died of fever and hunger on the crossing that the ships earned a name of their own: Coffin ships. Some lost a third or more of their passengers before they ever saw land. But those who survived changed the world they arrived in. The Irish poured into the growing cities of America, into Boston, New York, Philadelphia, where they were met with contempt, packed into slums, and told they need not apply for honest work. And yet, generation by generation, they built. They laid the railroads and the canals. They filled the police forces and the churches. They moved into politics and, in time, into power itself. A little over a century after the famine ships, the great-grandson of Irish famine emigrants would be elected President of the United States. And Ireland itself? Ireland never healed. Before the famine, some 8.5 million people lived on the island. Within a decade, through death and emigration, that number had collapsed. And unlike almost every other country on Earth, Ireland's population never recovered. To this day, nearly 2 centuries later, fewer people live on the island of Ireland than lived there in 1845. The scars are still in the ground, and the bitterness the famine left behind, the memory of a nation left to die by the empire that ruled it, became one of the deepest roots of Ireland's long fight for independence. A vegetable, and how one government chose to let it fail, helped remake the map of the modern world. Today, the potato has conquered the planet in a way the Inca could never have imagined. It is the 4th most important food crop on Earth, feeding billions. And the country that now grows the most potatoes in the world is not in Europe or the Americas at all. It is China. The potatoes saved humanity from famine again and again, but it never truly outran the danger that destroyed Ireland. Because we still grow it the same way, vast fields of a few near-identical commercial varieties, and its ancient enemy never died. Potato blight, that same organism, Phytophthora infestans, is still here. It still adapts. It still threatens harvests across the world every single year. The only reason it does not cause another catastrophe is that modern farmers fight it constantly, drenching their fields with fungicide in a war that never ends. The lesson Ireland paid for in 1,000,000 lives, that a single crop grown as a single clone is a single point of failure, is a lesson the world has still not fully learned. So think about the potato on your plate. It costs almost nothing. You boil it, mash it, fry it, without a second thought. And yet, this plain brown root came down from a mountain empire, was feared as the food of the devil, quietly built the modern world, and then, through a fungus and a failure of human decency, starved a nation and scattered its people across the entire earth. The potato was never really the villain of this story. The blight was only ever a fungus, doing what fungus does. The famine that followed was a choice about who deserved to be fed and who could be left to die. The potato was never just food. It was the thin line between survival and starvation for millions of people. And who controlled that line decided who lived. The next time you peel one, remember what it carried. Not just the empires it built, the nation it could not save, because no one in power chose to. If this surprised you, subscribe. We dig up the hidden history behind everyday things every week. And tell us in the comments, what part of this did they never teach you in school?